I think everybody can see my reflected screen right now. And as I say, today topics is Pacific and East Asian economies macro outlook for 2024. What we trying to say, the macro outlook, gross domestic product, inflation, industrial production, purchasing manager index, or those type of current account balance or balance of payments. If we will take a look at both financial market and real market indicators, and the first slide is about the Asia manufacturing side, the manufacturing output of Asia. This is global manufacturing cycle versus Asia export. On the left-hand side, on the gray line, you will see the global manufacturing PMI, Purchasing Manager Index, is an index here as you see. And this is the emerging market Asia, excluded China. Okay, this is important because China is a bias, an outlier economy in the East Asian economies. Because when we included the China for our observation, we can see that the graph style and lots of things change because China is a big game changer in the industrial production and manufacturing side in the world economies. For that reason, we are taking the emerging market Asia while excluding the China and how their exports are emerging. Here, as you see, this is the percentage of year-over-year change in the emerging market Asia, and this is the Purchasing Manager Index of the world economies. As you see, by the way, PMI, I want to make a clear explanation for the Purchasing Manager Index. Purchasing Manager Index is this. Let's say you are living in Egypt, okay, and you have lots of factories, lots of production centers, and central bank or the statistical agency in your country make lots of surveys about what is your expectation for the next 3 months durable goods order, or let's say non-durable goods order. What are the expectation of the, let's say, electrical vehicle sales for the next year? These are the surveys and real market. This is not interest rate, this is not financial market, this is not equity index. The PMI is directly related to the real economic indicators. This is the kitchen. This is not a dream. This is exactly what we see in real market. For that reason, when you see the correlation between the global manufacturing purchase manager index and the emerging market Asia export, this is directly correlated with each other. What is the important number for the purchasing manager index? It is the 50. 50 is the benchmark rate for the purchasing manager index. If PMI is above the 50 line, this means that economy is growing. There's an expansion in the production. There's an expansion and growth in the orders of production. Let's say this month, the Argentinian purchasing manager index is 52. And let's say next month it is 55, meaning that 3 digit from 52 to 55, or let's say in percentage, approximately 6% increase in the purchasing manager index, meaning lots of people increase their demand for the production and the orders of the Argentinian economy. Or if the economy's production is below the benchmark 50 line, meaning that economy is in the contraction line for the production indicators. Okay. As you see, the first message you should keep in mind that global manufacturing cycle is directly related to the East Asian manufacturing percentage changes. Meaning, if global manufacturing increasing, exporting of the East Asian economies directly increase. And here we have Asia -5 manufacturing output. These are the manufacturing output, the real production manufactured in the real economic centers like the factories, like the machines. And these are the products. The gray line is the technological products. and the light blue one is the total, and the purple one is non-technological products. As you see here, the basic and the fundamental message of this graph is showing that manufacturing in East Asia directly oriented with the technological products. These economies is export and manufacture oriented in technological products. Huge dimension in technological products and output. But non-technological products, it is like a steeper line around just 100. And the total is just above the non-manufacturing, non-technological products because of the technological export and manufacturing. And now we can take a look at the different economies, how their production, how their inflation, their composition of the industrial production, their balance of payment, inflation expectation, how they will evolve in 2025, and what are the expected and forecasted results for those economies. Let's start with the China. This is the China, the economic snapshot of the Chinese economy. And here you will see the contribution to the real gross domestic product, the real GDP growth. The GDP is the total production or total consumption or expenditure in an economy. You can calculate in two different ways. It can be productive output version, or it can be the expenditure version. In any case, the result and the number are the same. And we can calculate the general GDP growth, how the economy is growing with the percentage of year-over-year change. And here you will see on the y-axis, we will see the numbers of how the economic GDP production growing. And here in the x-axis, you will see the time interval from 1980s until now, approximately 45 years. And here in the snapshot, you will see the contribution. The economy is growing, but from which sources economy is growing? It is as important. Economy can grow with consumption, expenditure, investment, or economy can grow with the export, or let's say it can be grow with import from the rest of the world. And here, as you see, the investment contribute approximately in the second quarter for the Chinese economy 1.9, but the consumption is 2.2. Normally, before the structural transformation of the Chinese economy, the Xi Jinping started, normally the China is a consumption-based economy. It is really consumption-based economy. But then they tried to start an initial process for the structural transformation of the Chinese economy from consumption to the investment. Then, as you see, the contribution of the investment for the GDP growth is increasing. 1 quarter earlier, it is 0.6, but now it is 1.9. The consumption, however, as you see, structurally decreasing. What is the aim and the target of the transformation? The transformation start trying to decrease the consumption contribution and increase the investment contribution. This is important for the Chinese economy. And as you see, the contribution in the 2023 or 2024 first quarter is approximately 4%, but now it is just 2%. And the net exports. Net export is a really good contribution of the Chinese economy. Normally, the net export put a positive contribution of the growth because China is exporting more than it is importing. It's a net exporter. For comparatively, when we compare to the rest of the world, China is a competitive advantage in exporting. But especially last 2-3 years, please take a look at this net export contribution here. Normally, as you see in this line, the purple line, the net export, except 1985 or these years, these small years, it is generally here, as you see, putting a positive contribution of the GDP growth, meaning that net export is positive in China. or in other words, China is exporting more than it's import. And the total change in GDP, as you see here, the growth of the Chinese economy, normally, this is also another transformation and structural change in Chinese economy. Please take a look at from 2000 till now, or here, until here. Chinese economy in 2000, approximately growing 8-9% until 2008. Then, with the global financial crisis, the Chinese growing structurally decreased from 9% to 8 or 7%. Then, with the COVID-19 crisis, Chinese economy structural contraction is approximately decreased, but economy is still growing in a positive side. This is important because if you take a look at the GDP growth of the economies during the crisis or recession period, like the global financial crisis or COVID-19 crisis, you will see the EU, United States, Canada, Japan, all economies has experienced a huge contraction in their real economic growth, though in those recession years like 2008 or 2019. But the Chinese economy is growing still in positive side, but less than it is overall average, because the average is here. But now the China is growing approximately just 4-5%. This is a dramatic decrease for the Chinese economy because China is the motor machine of the world growth rate. It is approximately $25 trillion economy. And if the economy's growth rate decrease, let's say 2%, it is higher than, let's say, Somalia or Kenya overall GDP. Just 2% change is higher than lots of countries in Africa or Asia. Just think this, 25 or 30 trillion dollar economy. Just 1% is approximately $300 billion. $300 billion. This is a huge, because lots of economy in the world have a GDP less than $500 billion. Okay. And here on the right-hand side, you will see another graph. This is S&P Global Purchasing Manager Indices. And this is the third quarter of 2024. Because we are in the fourth quarter, the last quarter, and the previous quarter is the third quarter of 2024. And as you see, the Services Manager Index, because this is Purchasing Manager Index for different services, different sectors like services or manufacturing. And the services is here, but the manufacturing is less than the 50, as you see. The 50 is our benchmark for the Purchasing Manager Index. And now, as you see, in the China, almost both services and manufacturing sector is in the contraction region. This is a dramatic change for the Chinese economy. If you take a look at for these approximately 20 years, as you see, almost in all years in overall, because some quarters change, but when we take a look at for the data series for the yearly base, China is almost have a Purchasing Manager Index above the 50 benchmark line. But now the result is dramatic, as you see, and it is converging to the below 50 line. And this is showing a contraction and pessimistic approach for the Chinese economy and their production as well. By the way, I think there's a decrease in production quality. I don't know if I can give 1 second, please. Sorry for this. I'm trying to close my camera. The screen is freezing. Sorry for the delay. Give me 1 second, please. Now I think You can hear me, right?
Yes,
Anyway, I'm
perfect.
perfect. Perfect. I'm reflecting my screen again. Here we are. I was here, and this is the, as I said, the purchasing manager in the indices for the Chinese economy, and both in services and manufacturing sector, the economy is in the contraction region, and this is a not good sign for the rest of the world. Normally, the economy is evolving in the rest of the world is based upon lots of things that is coming from the Chinese production and their exports. If those economies is in the contraction region, the China, if they are not producing higher than the expected or their average result, this will be a dramatic pessimistic outlook for the rest of the world as well. And now let's take a look at the Chinese investment side. This is the China investment. This is fixed asset investment by enterprise ownership. This is year-to-date data and percentage change year over year. On the y-axis, you will see the changes in percentage, and on the x-axis again, you will see the dates for the time interval. And here, this is fixed asset investment by the private sector, the light blue one. The purple one is state-owned enterprises. This is the outlier case, the COVID-19 crisis. All fixed asset investment, both from the private or state side, public investment, both contracted. But now the average, the dramatic changes coming from the average. Normally the Chinese economy here between 2014 till the COVID-19 crisis have a fixed asset investment average during those 7 years approximately 10%. But right now, aggregate is just 5%, meaning that fixed asset investment in China, even from state, even from the private side, is in the contraction and has a downward sloping, meaning that fixed asset investment is decreasing in China. And especially for the private sector, it is almost zero, meaning that the private sector is not investing. And for the industries of the economy, if we make a categorization of the industries of the economy, we will see some different sectors, right? The gray one is the real estate, and the light blue one is the manufacturing, and the purple one is our infrastructure sector. As you see, the real estate sector, the growth dynamics, and who is triggering the economy's overall growth performance in fixed asset investment, this is the real estate sector normally, because the real estate sector in China is really bigger than you expected. The real estate or the fixed asset investment in real estate sector is, when you see here, please look at the gray line. It is almost 10%. But if we take a look at the numbers, how those fixed assets in real estate evolving, it is higher than infrastructure or manufacturing. Real estate is a really big sector in the Chinese economy and has an unprecedented importance for the Chinese economy. But now, please take a look at here. What's happening to real estate? Real estate during last 3 years is contracting. The homeowners or home buyers has a pessimistic expectation for the next couple of years in the real estate sector of the Chinese economy. But for the manufacturing or infrastructure, it is almost steeper. Here, as you see, around 10%. They are almost their average. But the real estate negatively diverging from the overall average of the manufacturing or infrastructure fixed asset investment. For that reason, the Chinese government take lots of measures to trigger the real estate of the economy, and they are giving extraordinary loans and support and subsidy for the real estate of the economy to trigger the demand in those sectors. And now, the most dramatic and important indicators for the rest of the world as well, the inflation. Let's take a look at what's happening in China on the inflation side. This is the chart for the consumer price index. And as you see, we are calculating the consumer price inflation with year-over-year change. Here, as you see, the headline, the real number, the total number, headline number in the consumer price inflation is around just 0.9% in Chinese economy. And then normally it is around 2%. But now the China is in the deflationary side. When you take a look at the news on the television, or when you take a look at the social media, you will see lots of news and the developments in the deflation in the Chinese economy. Why? Because China is a big economy in East Asia. And when the contractionary monetary policy is implemented after the COVID-19 crisis, lots of measures taken by the Chinese economy to deal with the inflation. Here, as you see, there is inflation in Chinese economy as well. They take lots of measures to fight with inflation, but then the inflation decreased below the zero, meaning that it is deflation, not disinflation. Deflation, meaning that decrease in prices, overall decrease in the prices. And now China takes some measures to put the price dynamics above the zero line, because consumer price inflation below zero, meaning that economy is contracting and is in recession, because growth and inflation is in the business cycle. They are cross cycle, meaning that if economy is growing, there is inflation. And let's take a look at the producer side. Now, this is the consumer price inflation, but how about the producer price inflation? The Chinese producer price inflation and the US import prices, because US imported the highest portion of their goods and services from the China. So if we take a look at the US import prices, and when we compare those import prices with the Chinese producer price index, it will be correlated with a huge sense. But here, as you see, normally, except the crisis period, please take a look at, this is the crisis period in 2008 global financial crisis, and this is the COVID-19 crisis. But especially when we take a look at the average, approximately 5% change in consumer price index and US imported prices. But now we see that there is a divergence, not a convergence. There is a divergence. US import price is increasing, but we are still in the negative side of the producer price inflation of the Chinese economy. Why this is happening? As we say, there is a deflation process in China overall. The prices is decreasing, both in producer and in the consumer side as well. For that reason, the state and government agencies take lots of measures to trigger the economy, domestic consumption and domestic production in any sense. And they are decreasing the interest rate. They are giving lots of loans and subsidies to trigger the production prices and the consumer prices. And how this inflation in consumer and producer sides affected from the monetary policy and credit growth of China. Please take a look at the key interest rate. They have lots of different rates rather than the policy rate of the central bank. They have reverse repo, they have repo, medium-term lending facility, and loan prime rate for 1 year and 5 years. As you see, the long rate, like the loan prime for 1 year is here, and loan prime is 5 years here. The year, 5 year and 1 year rate is above the short-term rate. Why? Because lots of consumer, producer, and investor expecting for the Chinese economy that today there is a deflation and prices is decreasing, but in the long run there will be inflation and rates will be higher in the long run. And when we take a look at what is happening, the change in the credit impulse of the Chinese economy, and we will see the contribution of the different sectors credit, aggregate financing, direct corporate financing, this is the light green line, the bank loans, this is the light blue, and the government bonds, this is purple, and the orange one is off balance sheet financing, like the derivative instruments, like the future forward and option. And as you see, normally the credit growth here in the expansionary period, and here it is a really decreasing. But when we take a look at the aggregate financing, it is still in the negative line, meaning that the credit growth rate is minus in China. An economy is trying to increase those credit growth rate to trigger and give an impulse for the overall economy and to create inflation both in consumer and producer side. Now, let's take a look at for the Indian economy, one of the highest population in the world and the second largest economy in East Asia. India economic snapshot, again showing the contribution of the GDP growth. Investment, net export, private consumption, and GDP. GDP is the orange line. Except the COVID-19 period, GDP is growing, as you see, around 6 or 7%. And real GDP growth for 10 years average is 6. And in the second quarter of the 2024, we are growing approximately 6.7%, higher than the average. And if we take a look at a comparison for the GDP growth of China and the India, meaning that China is in the degrowth period, meaning that growth is decreasing in China. However, it is really structurally strong in Indian economy. A few years ago, when we speak about the world economy indicator, we are saying that the motor dynamics of the world economic growth is China, but now it is changing. I think the Indian economy for the growth rate of the world will replace the China in the long run. And in the second chart, as you see, this is the government capital spending, like here. Please take a look at this fixed asset investment by the state-owned enterprises. This is like the investment from government side, public investment. And this is capital from the government spending. This is public expenditure. And they have some different federal government, and the overall state is here, and the total number is here. As you see, until the COVID-19 crisis, the average is around 4% for the government expenditure and capital spending, but now it is around 5.5. But in the long run, for the next couple of years, especially for the year end, because we are speaking about the expectation for the next year, 2025, and the capital contribution and capital expenditure for the government side will be higher, meaning that government expenditure for the growth side, please look at this one, government consumption. Okay, this is the dark blue one here. It will be really higher than the overall 5-10 years average, and will put a highly positive contribution to the GDP growth in next year, in 2025. This is another giant in the East Asian economy, the Japan. The economic snapshot. Again, we have approximately 4 years here, and this is showing the component of the GDP contribution. As you see, consumption is minus, meaning deflation, prices is decreasing. There is no pressure from the consumption side to the inflation. And the private investment is around zero, public investment is around zero. How the Japan economy is alive? It is with fiscal policy, not the monetary policy, because government expenditure is almost positive in Japanese economy for the fiscal policy and fiscal trigger and stimulation during the 20 years. And the net export putting a negative contribution for the GDP growth of Chinese economy. Why? Normally, China is exporting higher than import, but especially in second quarter of 2024, first of all, please take a look at this net export contribution in another years. Positive, 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 positive. Just here in after the COVID is negative, but positive, positive. Just here negative, meaning that Japanese economy changing their export-oriented strategies to create the inflation towards an import-oriented growth rate of the Japanese economy. And when we take a look at the core inflation and wage growth of Japan, this is the inflation, core inflation, excluding food and energy. And here we have, as you see, around 2%. And especially when we take a look at 2024, why the Japanese economy or Japanese Bank of Japan increased the interest rate, because they are saying that we have an expectation for the inflation pressure, meaning that these inflation, which is around 0 or minus, will be higher than expected for the next couple of years. And the nominal wage growth following the inflation and wage is adjusted according to price changes as well. Wage growth is positive in Japanese economy again. And this is the currency side. Especially, please take a look at, I want to take a look at this chart. Japanese yen position. As you see here and here, please take a look at this graph. This is July 24, meaning that approximately 6 months ago, when the Japanese economy, Bank of Japan, increased the interest rate, it really increased the strength of the Japanese yen, and USD Japanese parity decreased structurally from 160 to 112. This is a structural change for those economies, especially from the interest rate decision and the inflation, dealing with the inflation. And now we are in the global growth forecast for the developed markets. Please take a look at different markets here. These are the markets for US, Eurozone, and Japan. We are calling these economies as G3, meaning that there are different economies like Japan or East Asian economies. But when we speak about those dynamics, US, Eurozone, or US, sorry for this, US, Eurozone, and Japan, these are the G3 economies. And as you see, after the COVID-19 crisis, GDP growth is really, really positive. But then the GDP growth converged to overall cycle around just 2%. And the snapshot for the 2025, because we are dealing with what will happen for the next year, the forecast. And the forecast showing that the contraction in Japanese economy will be recovered with a positive growth in next couple of years, and the US growth will decrease from approximately 3% to 2%, and the Eurozone will recover again, but it is not recovered like the Japan economy. Growth in Eurozone economies will be smooth, and contraction or decrease in the growth rate will be experienced in the US economy. But there is a structural change and increase in the growth of the Japan, as we clearly mentioned here. There are lots of contribution of the government capital spending and the fiscal expenditure from the government side to trigger the economic activity. And here we take a look at the global developed market. But now, if we take a look at the emerging market economies like China, India, and Brazil, after the COVID-19 crisis, all have a recovery process in their GDP growth, but now they are converging around their potential GDP around 5%. And for the forecasted next couple of years, what will happen? China is again growing their potential growth rate 5%, and the India will grow until the first quarter around 6-7%. Then it's structurally increasing, but the Brazil is contracting as the political changes and the central bank decision making process brings some decrease in consumption, inflation, and growth dynamics of the Brazil economy. And now the global purchasing manager index. This is not China, this is not India, or this is not the US. This is global manufacturing index. As you see, again, we have fifth line, this is the benchmark, and the gray line is the manufacturing side, and the purple one is the services sector. We have some crisis period like 2001 dot-com crisis, and PMI is minus, meaning economies is contracted, or in the 2008 global financial crisis, or here as you see COVID-19 crisis. But the overall average for approximately 25 years for manufacturing services sector is around 52 or 53. But now the manufacturing sector is below the reference line of the 50, meaning that manufacturing sector is contracting in the overall global economies. But the services is still alive, meaning that especially in the inflation, when we take a look at the contribution of the inflation, manufacturing, food, those sides are under control. But the services inflation is still alive because services manufacturing is still increasing and it is not decreasing like the manufacturing. Even in the global purchasing manager index, not just like the economies in Japan, China, or India, or Brazil. It is when we take a average of the global manufacturing, this manufacturing manager index is in the contraction region, but services is not. For that reason, we are expecting services inflation upside risk in overall economy. And please take a look at this one. Global manufacturing PMI breakdowns. And here we have different economies. And these are showing the light colors showing the expansion and the dark colors, especially the red one. Red is in the contraction region and green is in the expansionary region. The global developed market, emerging market, US, Eurozone, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, UK, Australia, Japan, China, Korea, Taiwan, Indonesia, India, Russia, Brazil, and Mexico. And what is the most important side? This one. Please take a look at the developed market economies, US, Eurozone, or France. These are in the purchasing manager index, are in the contraction region. Their indicators is less than 50. But when we take a look at the economies like in the emerging market, Taiwan, Indonesia, India, Russia, Brazil, Mexico, those are full of in the expansion region. What we mean by this? Right now, in the world global economies, the emerging market economies, manufacturing is good. Their orders are good. Their real production is good. But when we take a look at the developed market economies purchasing manager index, they are in the contraction region, meaning that purchasing manager is in the below of the 50 benchmark line. Other side of the picture, the purchasing side and the inflation price side. This is the headline consumer prices for the different markets. As you see here, we have developed market US, United Kingdom, Eurozone, Japan, and Australia. This is emerging market Asia, China, India, Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia, and other emerging markets like Brazil, Mexico, Turkey, and South Africa. And as you see here, if we change the color to the blue side, meaning that the economy's inflation under the trend line. But if it is red, meaning above the trend line. And for the Japan, the inflation is above the trend line. Why? We explained it here for the Japanese economy. Please take a look at this one. Japanese economic growth will increase, and core inflation is increasing here as well. For that reason, the economies of Japan trend is upward sloping, higher than the average of last 10 or 15 years. For another economy, which is I'm living in, Istanbul, the Turkey, above the trend line, 52% inflation. It is huge. As you see here, no country experiencing higher than the 10%, but the inflation in Turkey is approximately 52% because of the wrong monetary policy and heterodox experience. By decreasing the interest rate, they suppose to control the inflation pressure, but it is an unprecedented inflation rate, which is also experienced 85% in July 23, but now it is 52 and currently it is 47. And these are the ex ante data, meaning that these are the realized data. But when we speak about the forecast, what will we expect for the next couple of years, especially for the 2025? What will be the global inflation forecast? Please take a look at this G3 again, US, Eurozone, and Japan. And here, as you see, the light green one is Japanese economy. And the inflation will be go down just smoothly. But the Eurozone and US inflation are stubborn and it will be evolved around 2%. So we can say that no country will experience in G3, in US, Eurozone, or Japan, no country will experience higher than 2 or 3% of inflation for the next 2025. An emerging market headline consumer price inflation for the China, India, and Brazil. As you see here, the Chinese inflation will increase because there are lots of trigger incentives from government sector and private sector to increase inflation, consumption, and investment. And inflation will be higher in 2025, but it is still lower than 2% target level. For the India, it will just upward, but around still 4%. And in Brazil, just below the 4% line, around 4%, which is the average of the Brazil economy for the last 10 years. And if you take a look at, this is the last slide on my side. This is the central bank inflation target for the Thailand, China, Korea, Eurozone, Indonesia, Malaysia, Taiwan, United Kingdom, US, Japan, Philippines, India, and Australia. Please take a look at target. And here, take a snapshot. What are these definitions? This is the inflation target range. This is showing the target range. And the blue dash showing the inflation target exactly. And here, the current inflation with purple and inflation 6 months ago. For instance, the current inflation is here and 6 months ago it is here, meaning that inflation is accelerating in Taiwan or Thailand, okay? Or let's say in the United States, inflation is 6 months ago here, but now it is here. Inflation is decreasing in United States. So which countries have some problems while dealing with the inflation? As you see, Thailand, China, and let's take a look at something like this. I think these are the most prominent economies. For instance, let's take a look at this one. India, 6 months ago, it's approximately 5%, but it is less than 4%, meaning that India is capable to dealing with the inflation pressure in their economy and they are decreasing. So today, I am trying to clarify the condition, what's happening in world economies, especially in East Asian and Pacific side. Their economic indicators, GDP growth, inflation, purchasing manager index, and their contribution and forecast, what can be happening in real economic indicators, and what are the expectations for the 2025 for those East Asian tigers like China, India, and Japan. Now the microphone at your hands. You can ask any type of question related to this topic or financial question in your mind. You're welcome now.
Thank you, Dr. Dogan. And if anyone has a question, please use the hand reaction or leave a comment in the chat. So, for example, we have a comment in the chat from Hyacinth Queller. Um, he asked, in these countries mentioned, what are the main causes of inflation?
Perfect. First of all, after the COVID-19 crisis, normally, let me put another uh, chat here, then you will see the contribution. Please take a look at this chart. I'm reflecting my screen again, and then you will see the answer of those questions. Can everybody see my screen?
Not yet, it's loading. Now we can see it. Yes.
Perfect. Please take a look at the contribution of the inflation. Where the inflation comes from. For instance, in the United States, take a look at the biggest one, private sheltering, home. Or let's say the services sector, light blue, restaurant, hotel, and transport. But for instance, please take a look at the gray one. It is a big contributor 2 years ago, but it is none here, even negative. What is this? Energy. Because Russian-Ukraine conflict put an upside in energy risk and energy oil prices approximately $140 per barrel in the VTI or Brent petrol. And now it is just $70 per barrel, meaning that energy has a negative contribution. But what the inflation is exactly coming from, for instance, food inflation, please look at this green one. But now it is just a small portion. So there's no food inflation as well. There's no energy inflation. What is the inflation coming from exactly? Inflation is coming from the sheltering and the services sector.